Hey, sports fans, it's world champion handicapper Mike North. Punch this number in your phone right now. If you're driving, pull over. 1-800-808-3419, 1-800-808-3419 for a free pick and info for the premier handicapping site in the country, VegasScoresAndOdds.com. It's the only site you'll ever need with expert handicappers like John Anthony, Denny Macklin, Tony Sacco, Ray Monahan, yours truly, and many more. Check out the homepage of VegasScoresAndOdds.com for a tote board with your buddy. Follow Vegas Scores and Odds on Twitter and dial up 1-800-808-3419. It's 1-800-808-3419, 1-800-808-3419, or go to VegasScoresAndOdds.com.
Hey, what's going on, Barroom? It's time for Week 5's installment of Cars Keys and the keys to the game against the Oakland Raiders in London.
Cars Keys is written and hosted by Matthew Carstensen and produced by Matt Carstensen and Aldo Gandia.
It's going to be an interesting game for many reasons, but let's just go ahead and get started. You won't hear me talk about the revenge game, and of course by the revenge game I mean Eddie Pinheiro. I don't know what else we would have from a revenge point of view, but I really want that to take the backseat to some of these other portions. So this is going to start the same way it started last week, although I never thought that I would say that one of the keys to this game is containing Josh Jacobs, especially after the draft last year. And much like Dalvin Cook, the reason is that the run game is extremely important to what John Gruden has been doing. For all of his issues and his team management and roster management issues that have been so plainly pointed out to so many people, Gruden has really realized, that's a horrible phrase, but he's really realized the limitations of his offense. Without, Antonio Brown, the cupboard is bare at most of these skill positions. And Jacobs is the guy that they've instead kind of focused a lot of this offense around. I'm not trying to offend Tyrell Williams, but let's be real, he's not going to play. And if he's their quote-unquote number one receiver, it doesn't lend you to a lot of hope for these guys. Darren Waller is the guy who has the most amount of receptions from the tight end position. But this is a team that is basically not passing the ball too well.
Here comes the pressure on Carr, and the pass is going to be off the hands of Waller.
What Gruden is also doing, and I'll get back to why the run game is so important, but we're seeing something very similar offensively to what the Bears have done. Carr is getting the ball out every 2.5 seconds. He's looking at an average just about 6 yards of average depth per attempt, and he's completing about 4.7 yards in the air per completion. Those numbers look extremely similar to what we're seeing out of Mitch Trubisky so far, except Mitch's numbers actually sit around 4.0, so he's getting a little deeper, but the whole premise has been the same. It's going to be a short passing game. It's trying to get the ball out quickly, and it's trying to tie that in with a heavy dose of the run game. And that's where the containment of Josh Jacobs comes in. So while Jacobs has had a pretty solid season overall for a rookie, right? You look at his numbers of, basically 62 carries and 307 yards at this point.
Second man throw is Josh Jacobs. Got there. Touchdown Raiders.
5 a carry. He's got 2 touchdowns. Second guy to him is DeAndre Washington with only 17 carries. Jacobs has really been the focal point of this offense. Starting off in week 1, when they had 23 rushes to them, he hasn't hit that level again, right? He had 12 and 2. He had 12 carries in week 2. He had 10 carries in week 3, and he had 17 again in week 4. But he's been such a focal point. What gets very interesting in their use is how they're using him. All the advanced metrics kind of point to Jacobs this year as much more of a north-south runner. Think along the veins of a Gore or a Gus Edwards type, right? In week 1, what we saw heavy duty from him was everything between the tackles. He had 2 runs that were really tried to bounce outside, and both of those were for loss. So Gruden has made an adjustment. He's actually made 2. First, is he is doing a little bit more of these stretch plays, right? Trying to get open a little bit to the outside. But what's been more impactful for him is where he's running. What you'll notice is the most amount of success and the heaviest utilization for Josh Jacobs is running right. And that's because if you look from left to right, it is Colton Miller, Richie Incognito on the left side, a new pairing on both, and Miller had his huge struggles last year. But starting at center, it's Hudson and Gabe Jackson, and then Trent Brown. What you're seeing is a lot of stuff off center over between Hudson and Jackson, and between Jackson and Trent Brown.
Plays 1st and 15. Jacobs, Hudson a block. Good, a block. Oh, and he bursts through! And he's got a 16-yard gain.
Jackson is the catalyst for what he wants to do in the run game. And it's very obvious why, right? Gabe is an extremely great road grader. He's been an all-pro in the past. That's where they're finding the most amount of success. Now, if you look at the flip side, right, that ironically lines up with Khalil Mack, and if he's playing Akeem Hicks, the strongest part of our defense and the best portion of our run defenders. If Akeem Hicks is playing, I don't know about you, but I'm going to be sitting down focused on the Hicks-Jackson matchup. That is going to be just an all-out brawl, and I love those type of in-the-trench matches. Even if Hicks is playing, what I do expect to see is a steady dose of Nick Williams, who's obviously earned his right to be there. Roy will be out there a lot. Last week we saw in many instances Aaron Lynch kind of being positioned as a 5 technique, sometimes even to the point where he was almost a nose. I don't know that you can get away with that same sort of thing against Hudson and Gabe Jackson. But that's what we're going to see. So we're going to see strength against strength this week, right? Right side of the line versus our defensive line. And if we can stop Josh Jacobs, that then takes the ball and puts it back into Derek Carr's hand. You've heard me talk a lot about those numbers. If you look at his completion percentage, right, he's sitting at 72%. Derek Carr is just completing a ton of passes. But if you look at his pass charts, what's fascinating about that for this year, again, has been the amount of passes that are short of the line of scrimmage, right? The amount of passes that are 5 yards or under. When you look at week 1, he was much more willing to go deep. Week 2, he pulled back a little bit. In week 3, we see some more smattering. In week 4, we really didn't see a whole lot. Now, he did have 2 touchdowns in that game, but what we saw was just a tremendous amount of plays thrown over to the left side. The reason I call this is not because it's the Mitch thing that Derek Carr can't throw it to the right, but what they were lining up to do was almost that they were running right, throwing left, running right, throwing left, and they're doing that short. They don't trust the line for pass blocking. We know that they won't trust the line for pass blocking against us. So the defense is going to have to get aggressive. I don't care if this is the most talented team in the world or in the Oakland Raider department, kind of one of the least talented skill position teams that we are going to face all season. But if you to make any team one-dimensional and you can just tee off on them, and I do not believe in Derek Carr as a quarterback. So I think this is a game, right? Even with all those numbers, he's got 3 interceptions this season.
Pass thrown and right into the arms of Breland for the interception.
Those interceptions are anytime, 2 of those are actually on passes 10 yards or under, right? He's just, even though he's completing passes, he's completing checkdowns and quick outs. If you take away the run and he's going to have to try to extend and challenge the defense, he's going to turn the ball over. And so that's really going to be first and foremost for me.
Cars Keys will be right back.
The second key for me is going to be better back-end communication. It's tough to look at this defense and complain about anything, but if you watched last week, and it's kind of continued through each week this season. There seems to be some communication concerns or coverage concerns when it comes to the backfield. You'll see almost sometimes right up to the stop where the defensive backs and the safeties are all talking to each other, almost confused as to who's going to have what responsibility.
Deep ball, Cousins for Thielen, and out of reach.
Last week that almost ended up in an easy touchdown for Thielen that Kirk Cousins missed and then had to publicly tell the entire Minnesota population that he apologized to a receiver for missing him, which should tell you exactly where the mental makeup of the Minnesota Vikings is right now. But that was a big miss. And Fuller looked to be almost playing in some sort of trail technique at that point and expecting over-the-top help that wasn't there. And later on in the game, right, the big play to Stephon Diggs, it looked very similar. There seems to be a lot of confusion. And I think some of that is obviously, right, these guys with Ha and Buster, they're new. They're trying to figure this out. The scheme is new. And really, Pagano is using the safeties in deep cover, center field type positions more than ever. But he's giving them a lot of freedom to make reads and to drive on the ball. And that seems to be, again, causing some confusion. I think I'm handing off, and I'm not. There's no one there. Or I should be handing off to take a guy in the flat, but I don't trust that my safety's going to be there, so I'm not doing that. We need to see that happen. I think that's some of the reason that Pagano hasn't played as physical or aggressive with his defensive backs yet, and why there's been so focused on keeping everything in front of them. That's going to be a real big thing that I want to see worked on this week. Again, with Tyrell Williams most likely not playing, the only guy that you're going to have to worry about from a passing perspective is going to be their tight end, right? And Hunter Renfrow, and it's Weller is going to be the tight end, excuse me. He's the one that's got 33 catches. You've got Renfrow with 18. You don't have anybody else over 10 catches on that team. So this is going to have to be that game where we can start to see everybody settle in, everybody knows their positions, everybody knows what they're supposed to do, and this is going to be the week that we have to fix that communication. The last key of the week for me is we really need a change on the offensive play calling. This really has to be the week that we start to set the run game and have the run game pop off. And while Oakland has been solid against the run, right, they're about 3.9 yards per carry, they will also be without Clellan and Vontaze Burfict. And so, while their pass rush has been anemic, those guys have definitely helped out in the run game. On the inside for them, right, Jonathan Hankins is a handful. He's really good against the run. That'll be one of my key matchups later on. But really, you're talking about outside of that, Arden Key, Maurice Hurst, Max Crosby. And Max Crosby, actually, I'm a big fan of what he's done so far. But they're gonna have to rely on those guys to make some run game stops. And I don't know that that's going to be a strength for them. There's going to be opportunities. If you watched that game tonight of Seattle versus LA, what Seattle did early on against LA is what we've seen teams do to us all season. They've basically been giving gap assignments in early downs where everybody's responsible for a gap, so a running back doesn't have anywhere to go. The reason for that is because there's a predictability in the run game. There seems to be a predictability in the way that Matt Nagy calls the run game. This happened last year. This is what started off with Jordan Howard, and we kind of made the legitimate excuse, right, that Howard wasn't much of a threat in the pass game, and that's why they teed off. The defense really isn't changing. What Seattle did to LA is what every team does for us. So we need to then alter that play calling. And it really starts for me first off where the Bears need to pass more out of obvious run formations. What we started to see in order to get the run game going, it's like, right, everybody reads off the same book. Oh, you want to get the run game going? Guess what? You go heavy formations. You start running 2-3 tight ends with a single wide out. Maybe you put one of those tight ends as almost a fullback and you run. And anybody that reads Sharp's analysis on football, right, heavy formations are the worst ones to run on because everybody tees off. So guess what you have to do? We now need to start to pass more out of that formation. When we go heavy with multi-tight ends and a single wideout, we need to be a threat to pass. And not just a threat, right? But a threat to actually go deep. And if you think about those situations, right? If your one wide receiver is Allen Robinson and he's going against Worley or Conley, he's going to win that fight 9 out of 10 times. I don't care if Joseph or Joyner is coming over the top. That's an ideal matchup. From a linebacker standpoint, Whitehead or Morrow, they're better coverage guys, especially Morrow's got a little bit more speed, but they don't have the size. And so from a tight end perspective, this is a game where, please don't hate me for what I'm about to say, but we should see something out of an Adam Shaheen because they can't match up with him. I would like to see something out of a Trey Burton. Maybe you're going to see a little bit more JP Holes from almost an H-back, fullback type role. There are mismatches on this defense, right? Joyner is such a little dude. But now, right, if you get Allen single covered, go deep. Push that ball vertically. That's a play to start to make teams think, hey, they're going to go heavy. They may run, but they might take a home run shot here, and we've got to be wary of that. So you can't just load up to stop the run when the formation goes heavy. To piggyback onto that, second is the ball needs to start to get deeper in this offense. I'm going to be talking next week in the bye week specifically about the offense. So I'm really kind of looking and running through numbers and looking at all 22, and I'm going to do a little bit of a deeper dive into the Bears offense and what we've seen. And so much of this is going to be predicated on what we see against Oakland. A lot of folks are going to make excuses that Oakland defense is not very good. So what Chase's numbers are, if they are in fact good, is a product of going against a bad defense. Well, guess what? We went against a really bad defense in Washington. We technically went against a pretty bad defense in Denver if you watch the way that Jacksonville and other teams have scored on them. And we played conservative. And so what we really need to see is, and you can forgive me for these numbers, and again, we'll go into deeper, right? But Mitch is like 5 for 15 on passes between 10 and 20 yards. He's 4 for 10 on passes, over 20. You're talking about, a handful of attempts, and most of those coming early on. Those numbers aren't going to do it, right? I need to be able to push more than, a handful of times a game. I need to be a threat. I need to, I said it a lot on Twitter, but we can't be having games where I have 16 completions of my 25, all 5 yards or less, and 9 of those coming behind the line of scrimmage. That's just not a way that you're going to set your offense up for success. That is what you have to do when you get to ball control and when you've got leads and play off the leads. But to take that lead, to extend those leads, to really put your foot on the gas, you have to go deeper. I'm really excited to see the way that this looks this week. And that's not a shot, and it doesn't mean that I say Chase is a better quarterback than Mitch. But right now, Mitch isn't seeing the field. And Chase does see the field. Now, he might not have the arm, he can't make all the throws, but what he will do is he will push that ball more vertically because he sees the field better.
3rd and 7 to start the second quarter as Daniel connects again.
We saw an increase in pass plays over 5 yards last week, and that's scary to make such a big deal out of that. But now we need to see that continue on to 10-yard plays. To make the Nagy offense works, we need to see chunk plays. We need to push. And that needs to start this week. That, to me, means less Tariq Cohen. I love that guy, and he's always a home run hit, but that drop he made was inexcusable. I just don't see him making the impact. They have slowly scaled back his snaps. I think last week was the least amount he had seen all season. That needs to continue. until he starts to make those plays again. Now, ideally, I'd like to have Leno on the bench as Phil's video kind of calls out and points out his struggles. But this is a lesser competition game for him, right? This is an Arden Key, a Max Crosby type of situation where I really need to see him stand up to make these plays. But you know, this is that game where these guys need to start to either put their foot in the ground and take that step, player by player, offense by offense, snap by snap, look by look. Anthony Miller, I'm looking at you. This has got to be a game for you to set the tone for the rest of the season. And that's only going to happen if we see a change in the play calls.
Cars Keys will be right back.
Hello everyone, my name is Alec Lifshos, aka Trey Busy, and I'm here to have a conversation with you guys about mental health. A lot of times in our communities, we don't talk about mental health enough, and it goes under the radar as a reoccurring issue. So I took the liberty to create the Let's Talk It Out podcast. This podcast was created to break the silence on mental health issues and to give a voice to those suffering. I have conversations with professionals in the mental health field as well as those who are suffering, and we break down different ways to stump stigmas and ways to cope with mental health conditions. The show is broadcasted live every Thursday at 8 p.m. Central Standard Time on Mixlr.com/LTIO podcast. That's MIXLR.com/LTIO podcast. If you can't make the live recording of the podcast, then you can find the podcast available to you on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, and wherever else you listen to podcasts. Give the podcast a follow on Twitter and Instagram at LTIO Podcast on both platforms. Thank you, and I look forward to talking to you guys in the future.
As for my key matchups in the game, first off, should be obvious, right? Hudson and Jackson versus Hicks and Goldman. That is going to be where the game can be won. That's where we can contain everything. That's a hugely important matchup on the side of the ball. On the flip side, it's going to be either Long and Whitehair against Hankins, right? They'll move him around, right? They'll try to get him some different looks. He is a monster in the run game. If we want to start to run the ball, we're going to have to do a really good job of containing him. And I think that this has got to be a week where either Long starts to show he's going to get better and healthy, or we need to start worrying about, his replacement. Though I don't think we need to worry from what we saw from Coward last week. The other key matchup is going to be Allen Robinson versus whatever sucker they throw at him. Worley, Conley, I don't care who it is. He is a mismatch this week whenever he steps on the field. And definitely, right, this should be a big game for him. So that he's definitely going to be one of my guys and that's how I will start for, right, the key player of the game, key players of the game. It is definitely going to be Allen Robinson. I expect him to go too often. We heard Chase talk about in his play calling or in his after the game press conference that Allen is just a guy that you have to get involved early. Through 4 games, there's been 9 passing touchdowns against the Oakland Raiders. That's a number that I expect to continue, and I should expect to see 1 to 2 touchdowns from Allen this week. The second player, and I'm somewhat regretting this because it hasn't happened, but I think the other guy's got to be Anthony Miller. Anthony saw a fair amount of snaps. He's obviously relegated in a slot role, right? That is why Javon Wims saw more snaps. He got basically all of Taylor Gabriel's snaps plus the initial snaps that he would normally have on a week-to-week basis. But this is, again, you look at who they have in the defensive backfield. Are they going to try to cover him with Joyner? Are they going to try to cover him with Carl Joseph? Are they going to move Conley or Worley inside? Who do they think they're going to be able to cover him with on this team? And so this has got to be that game. He's very obviously frustrated with the offense. You can read between the lines in his tweets. You can read what he said about Chase and being a general and seeing the field. This has to be a game where he tears off and starts to show that he's going to be an impact player for the rest of the season. Last but certainly not least, right? Who's that third key player for me this week? As much as I want to go with Chase, it's not gonna. I can't look at him at being important. It's the players around him that are much more important. But I would really like to see a Leonard Floyd game. We've seen plays. It seems like all he does is sack Aaron Rodgers, right? I know he's been more impactful in the run game, but that matchup with Miller on the left side, I really feel is something that he should do very well in. As athletic as he is, as physical as he's been this season, this is a game that he should start to take that step and push forward and really show us exactly what what we've all been wanting to see from him since he started. That's it for this week's episode of Cars Keys. As always, you can follow me on Twitter at CarsKeys1. I really appreciate everybody listening in. And again, next week with the bye week upon us, I will be doing a deeper dive into the offense, talking about tendencies, talking about some of the advanced metrics, but also trying to relate it back to just, what we're seeing on the field. Thanks, everybody. See you next week.
Hey, it's Aldo Gandia, and for many years the NFL draft will come along and I just wasn't prepared for the onslaught of names, players I just didn't know. Well, this year, that's not going to happen to me because I'm listening to Draft on Tap, the show that's hosted by Ryan Badgley and has the expertise of Danny Shimon every week. Plus, every week, there are draft experts as guests, and so now I'm keeping abreast of all of the top draft prospects for the 2020 NFL Draft, and I'm being thoroughly entertained. Check out Draft on Tap on the Bears Barroom Radio Network.